Hello and thank you for joining me. My name is Lee Booth and I'm the Trading Manager for Society Matters, which is a trading subsidiary of Citizens Advice Gateshead. Today I have the great pleasure of talking through the changes that have taken place to our welfare system over the last 100 years, leading to the introduction of universal credit. Welfare support isn't new, and I'm going to talk to you about welfare support and the government's involvement in this. The Elizabethans had a poor law which was partly responsible for beggars. The Elizabethans made parishes responsible for the poor. Most hospitality during the medieval period was run by the church and was mainly to look after the elderly and frail. The aim of the poor law was to reduce the costs of looking after the poor. Under the poor law, parishes were grouped into unions to build workhouses. Poor people could now get help if they were prepared to leave their homes and go to the workhouses. Welfare support isn't new. However, a state pension only goes back 100 years or so, and limited unemployment insurance was introduced by the government in 1911. Between 1920 and 1936 was a time of real struggle. There was mass unemployment, industrial decline, economic depression, protests against unemployment and poverty. The most famous march was in 1936. This march was called the Jarrow March and was organised by the Jarrow Crusade, and this was to protest against unemployment and poverty. 200 men set off in 1936 from Jarrow in the northeast, where unemployment was 70%, and they marched to London to deliver a petition to the government. The outcome of the march saw the government listen to their petition and build a steelworks which brought welcome employment to the area. William Beveridge published a report in November 1942 and introduced the idea of from cradle to grave. The National Insurance Act of 1946 was an Act of Parliament passed by the then government, which had won the general election the year before. The Act established a comprehensive system of social security throughout the UK in return for paying a national insurance contribution. An individual would gain security against ill health and unemployment. Means testing and other approaches enforced earlier were simplified and replaced by the one system. National insurance now become compulsory for all workers except married women. Most people paid the substantial £4.11 a week. In return, workers received benefits for interruption of earnings, such as a result of illness, and for unemployment or old age. For the elderly, a state pension was paid when men reached 65 and women reached 60. Older workers were encouraged to continue working, and two-thirds of men decided to carry on rather than taking up their pension. Mothers received a lump sum on the birth of each child if they had been paying national insurance, and they received an allowance for 18 weeks. A death grant gave widows help with funeral expenses, and as an extension to the scheme, the Industrial Injuries Act gave compensation for people injured or killed at work. As part of a series of reforms, the National Insurance Act of 1938 created a single stamp which would cover all benefits and was the responsibility of the new Ministry of National Insurance. This was when the term NI stamp was first used. This was the first time earnings of families were taken into consideration, and this number was issued at birth. The Act formally abolished the poor law system that existed since the reign of Elizabeth I and established a social safety net for those who did not pay national insurance contributions, such as the homelessness, physically handicapped, and unmarried mothers. It also provided help to the elderly Britons who required supplementary benefits to make subsistence living and obliged local authorities to provide suitable accommodation for those who, through infirmity, age, or other reasons, were in need of care attention which was not otherwise available. This was also the establishment time of Citizens Advice, and the purpose was to provide advice on the effects of the war and how to use rationing books. In the 1950s and 60s, there was little change to the welfare provision. Pensions began getting poorer, and full-time employment we had enjoyed began to decline in the 1970s. By 1981, Britain was then in a recession, which started to cause unemployment to rise. Who remembers UB40, the band? Well, this was actually the unemployment benefit form during the period, which was also called UB40. It was known as the signing-on card for the dole. Rise in exchange rates and cheap imports forced the closure of many factories, shipyards, and coal mines. By 1982, unemployment had reached more than 12% of the population, which was roughly 3 million people, and it was the worst it had been for over 50 years. National welfare state support remains a principle of successive governments. During the next 30 years, successive governments introduced numerous changes of the welfare and benefits system. During this time, 3 different government departments became responsible for administering and paying out benefits. This was Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the Department for Work and Pensions, and the Department for Communities and Local Government. In 1988, income support was introduced to help people on a low income who were not signed on as unemployed. In 1994, the Social Security Act. This brought incapacity benefit to replace long-term sickness benefit. In 1999, the Welfare Reform and Pensions Act proposed that all benefit claimants must attend interviews within 3 days of making the first claim, and this was to discuss entitlement, reasons for not working, and to obtain help in getting a job. In the year 2000 budget, the Chancellor announced large increases in income support scales for families with children. During this time, there is a lot of change. In 2008, ESA is replaced by a range of incapacity benefits. The Welfare Reform Act of 2012 was about to change the landscape of the UK benefits system forever. By 2010, the system was baffling. Different rules for different benefits, as it was based on levels of income, levels of savings. The system was open to fraud and people applying for the wrong benefit. The current benefits system is so complex that while fraud fell slightly to 1.1 billion, the amount lost to claimant error is at the highest it's ever been at £1.3 billion, which was said by the Department of Work and Pensions. The Department of Work and Pensions also reported in 2008-9 that 12.7 billion means-tested benefits and 5 billion tax credits remained unclaimed. For 2011, the total benefit expenditure for the UK was 159 billion. At the Conservative Annual Conference, Ian Duncan Smith, who was the Work and Pensions Secretary at the time, said we need to make the social security system fairer to claimants and taxpayers. Universal credit would be legislated in the Welfare Reform Act of 2012, and this would avoid a cliff edge that was said to trap people in unemployment. In September 2012, Labour called on the government to postpone the introduction of its flagship welfare reform, Universal Credit. But a year arguing that there are too many unresolved problems with the scheme and not enough time to iron them out before the launch.
We have, in some ways, created a welfare gap in our country between those living long-term in the welfare system and those outside it. Those within it grow up with a series of expectations. You can have a home of your own, the state will support you whatever decisions you take, you'll always be able to take out no matter what you put in. This has sent out some incredibly damaging signals. That it pays not to work, that you're owed something for nothing. It gave us millions of working age people sitting at home on benefits even before the recession hit. It created a culture of entitlement, and it's led to huge resentment amongst those who pay into the system because they feel that what they're having to work for, others are getting without having to put in the effort. The system is saying to these people, can't afford to have another child? Tough, save up. Can't afford a home of your own? Tough, live with your parents. Don't like the hours you're working? Tough, that's just life. So there's a real welfare gap that exists in our country, and we have to admit that and try to deal with it. Now, when we look at how we got into this mess, we can go back in time and we can see a lot of good intentions. Why does the single mother get the council house straight away when the hard-working couple have been waiting years? Well, because governments and local councils wanted to make sure that children got a decent start in life, so mothers were given priority for council housing. Why do we have people on big salaries still living in council houses? Well, because governments wanted social housing to support hard-working people, so the eligibility criteria were set quite wide and the tenures were set long. Why has it become acceptable for many people to choose a life on benefits? Well, because governments wanted to give people dignity while they're unemployed, and while this clearly is important, it has led us to the wrong places, to job seekers being called customers instead of claimants, and to conditionality on benefits being set at a bare minimum. Now, as well as the good intentions of government, there was also an assumption of trust at the heart of the system, that people would naturally do the right thing, that they would use the system when they fell on hard times, but then work their way out of it. This may have worked when the welfare state was born, when there was a stronger culture of collective responsibility in our country. But as I've argued for years, the welfare system has helped to erode that culture. From the couple told they'll get more benefits if they live apart, to those who knew they'd earn more by signing on than going out to work, time and again, people weren't just allowed to do the wrong thing, they were actively encouraged to do so. So that's how we got here. How do we get out? Some say the answer is more money. The argument goes that if you give more welfare money to those who are higher up the income scale, as well as to those at the bottom, then you iron out those perverse incentives that encourage people not to work, not to save, not to do the right thing. Indeed, that's part of the thinking behind universal credit. It's about helping more people to escape the poverty trap and get on in life. But anyone thinking we can just keep endlessly pumping money into the system is wrong. Frankly, as the last government put it, there's no money left. We're already spending £1 in 8 on working age welfare. That is twice as much as we spend on defence. The truth is we can't just throw more money at the problem and paper over the cracks. The time has come to go back to first principles, to have a real national debate and ask some fundamental, searching questions about working age welfare. What is it actually for? Who should receive it? What are the limits of state provision? And what kind of contribution should we expect from those who are receiving benefits?
In April 2013, this saw the introduction of universal credit and the rollout plan, and this was to be fully in place and rolled out by 2023. In April 2013, on the launch of universal credit, the Pathfinder areas were launched. Now, this aimed to keep the system simple to start with, so they were accepting people who were single, no dependent children, people looking for work, no health problems, and who had no housing costs. In 2014, this seen the rollout of the Gateway service online, where people could enter the postcode and find out whether they were eligible to join the Pathfinder criteria. By 2016, the full digital service had now launched right across the UK, and it expanded criteria, so couples, families with a maximum of 2 children, people with health conditions were now able to claim universal credit. In 2018, the full digital service rollout was complete right across the UK. Most new claims now being made would be for universal credit. The Trussell Trust charity surveyed their users of food banks and found that 56% experienced issues with housing. Only 8% of people said the universal credit payment covered their living costs, meaning universal credit was not covering 92% of living costs. 70% of people had experienced debt issues, and in areas where universal credit had been rolled out, they'd seen a 52% rise in food bank demand compared to the previous year. So where do we currently stand? As of January 2020, the migration for residents of Harrogate has only got 15 people migrated out of a planned 10,000.